But I'm really delighted to have a distinguished contributor of his standing to speak to us, having just in the last week, I think, received the very prestigious Theodore Hesburgh Award for an outstanding contribution to higher education from the American Council for Education, on which I congratulate you. John, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vivian. It's wonderful to be here. I'm a longtime fan of Universities UK and the enterprise here. Dr. Beale runs a great show. We're old friends, and it's always nice to return. This theme for the later panel, if we could only see ourselves as others see us, traces really to the first thing that I would say. The Jesuits taught me the poem from which those lines come 60 years ago now, and it's a way of thinking about life. They also taught us that it was very important regularly to ask ourselves, especially if you're blessed with talent. I say this to my students frequently. It's very easy to say to this group. Every single person in this room was given a blessing. We had nothing to do with getting the blessing. It just happened to us. We were born smart, and we're privileged that the students with which we work were born smart, and that brings a real obligation with it. You can't just, if you're given that gift, treat it as your own. It's a treasure to be held. So you have to ask yourself regularly, am I living a useful life? And one way to do that is to ask yourself, I wonder how others view me. And of course, both of those themes connect deeply to the theme of internationalization. It strikes me that this assemblage here is an assemblage that has a very clear, again, what the Jesuits would have called apostolate. We have clear missions, and it's a worthy mission. The world is miniaturizing. That's a given. Interconnectedness is now the basic fabric of the world. And I'm not talking simply about economic interconnectedness, but interconnectedness in every single way. If one begins to accept that proposition, which it seems to me is undeniable, then one has to begin to play out the consequences of it. From a strictly utilitarian standpoint, if one takes nothing but a utilitarian view, if that's what's happening to the world, it's foolish to ignore it. But there's a much deeper, and here's where the fact that I have a PhD in religion comes into play. There's a much deeper calling, I think, than a utilitarian calling that's available to every single one of us in this room. And that is simply this. This experiment, I'm deliberately ambiguous about the antecedent, hoping it'll become kind of clear as I speak. But this experiment, whatever it is that we call our world or humankind, it's been going on for a good time now. In the case of the universe, several billion years, and humankind, millions in the making to get us to this point. And we now come to this moment in the 21st century when the world is shrinking to the point that we, having developed this notion, this robust notion that exists in so many parts of the world of affirmative individualism. I come from Greenwich Village, New York, so we know what individualism is there. You see it every day in Washington Square Park. The question becomes, as we move into this century, is the experiment going to succeed? As the world miniaturizes, how are we going to react? And some people are reacting. You can see it all around the world by trying to erect gates and keep out the forces of miniaturization and interconnectedness. That will lead ultimately, if we continue to accentuate that which divides us, that will lead to very bad things. Maybe a clash of civilizations, but whatever it is, it'll lead to bad things. There's another approach, which of course is the approach of embracing the miniaturization, seeing the wonderful diversity that exists just if you look around this room, the various manifestations of what a human being can be. And if one begins to ask ourselves questions like if we could see ourselves as others see us, and how does that person that's so different from me, the person in the room most different from me, ideally, how does that person see the world, and how does that enrich my own way of seeing the world? This for me, as a student of religion back in the 60s, was the great influence on my church. I'm a Catholic, of Pope John XXIII and the ecumenical movement. But the notion of a community of communities and building in our students the skills that are, frankly, on a utilitarian basis, necessary for a miniaturized and interconnected world, but they can also be seen in this highly sublime way. So I would submit that a useful life is there for all of us to seize. Now, I've been asked to speak, and not for more than 10 minutes, about the instantation of internationalization that is NYU. And I'll do that very quickly and then try to put it in a larger context. So for those of you that don't know New York University, NYU, 15 years ago, it was a solely American university. It is a private university, even though it carries the name New York University. It is not the State University of New York. That's a whole separate university. It is the largest private university in the United States. For us today, 15 years later, the notion of internationalization involves both sides of what one might mean by that. It means not only internationalizing our own original campus in New York City, but it means embracing the experience of internationalization for every student, ideally, and it gets pretty close to that, every student that comes to NYU. Now, we are today what we call a global network university. Network is important here. A global network university. Today, we have presences, campuses, real campuses, physical facilities, academic dorms, staff, internships, and so forth in 16 cities on 6 continents. So right here in London, for example, if you go to Bedford Square, there's the NYU academic facility, a glorious facility. There are dorms here, and every semester there are somewhere between 200 and 300 NYU students right here in London. So we are spread throughout the world, with the exception of Antarctica, although I did plant the flag there a few years ago. We don't have a campus there yet, but we're spread throughout the world. Now, we are not a whole host of things you might think we are. So we are not a branch campus system. We are not the educational equivalent of a multinational corporation. We're not primarily attempting, we're not at all attempting to use internationalization as a revenue strategy. For us, it is solely and completely an academic, quality-enhancing strategy. The word that probably best describes what is, at the moment, in terms of the instantation of a full university, and a research university at that. Okay, so a major research university. What we're doing is still unique. Others have begun to tiptoe into doing similar things, and there have been some individual schools that have tiptoed into doing it. I mean, parts of universities, but we're the only institution right now where we're all in on this model. We see it, frankly, as supplementing what we used to call our locational endowment. So we're not a highly endowed school monetarily. We're not like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Stanford. In fact, our per capita, our per student endowment is in the bottom third of American private universities. So the per capita endowment of NYU is less than the per capita endowment of St. Francis College in Brooklyn, where I was chairman of the religion department before I went to law school. So we're not monetarily endowed, but we've always felt we had a great locational endowment in Greenwich Village, New York. And the Global Network University we view as a structural endowment, because we have a theory that if it is what we think it is, and we would call it a circulatory system. So think here, Jacob Burckhardt's History of the Renaissance in Italy. Okay, and think whether or not in the context of the circulatory system that was Renaissance Italy, whether if you had gone to Leonardo or to Michelangelo and you had said to either of them, you can do your art in this town if you do it exclusively in this town, but otherwise you can't do it. Okay, you would not have gotten Leonardo or Michelangelo to do their art in your town because they wanted to circulate among Milano and Firenze and Roma and so forth. And the thought is that there's a significant portion, this is not for everybody, a significant portion of high talent individuals who want to live in a circulatory system, who want to circulate among the major idea capitals of the world, and want their children to have such a life, or their families to have such a life, or maybe they're empty nesters or not yet nesters or whatever. But we've certainly had some success in recruiting people we wouldn't have gotten if we were simply recruiting them to New York. And that goes for faculty, students, and staff. So the 4-minute course in the evolution of this is very simple. I'm going to take you 1.0 through 4.0 very, very quickly. So 1.0 was simply looking out at the city in which we are and viewing it as an asset. And New York City, at the time we began thinking about this is at the turn of 2000, it's 2001. So I was appointed in May 2001. And I needed a story, and I needed a story of a useful life and why NYU was different. And I had, if I was going to take this assignment, which I was being asked to do. And I began to notice things. I began to notice that New York was the first city in the world that had a neighborhood for every country in the world that was populated by people that were born in that country. So you could taste the food, hear the music, hear the prayers, hear the language of any country in the world. You know, and then there are other cities. London's such a city now, and other cities now. But New York was it in 2000. And 1.0 was simply understanding that and understanding the fact that we didn't have a campus. Our wonderful sister university to the north of us in Manhattan, Columbia, has gates and a campus, and you walk through the gates and you could be in Shangri-La. But we have no gates. I used to say we have no grass on campus. I now realize I have to say we don't have a blade of grass on campus because I didn't realize the double entendre at first. But not a single gate. And we're crowded. And you walk out of most NYU buildings and we're not next to an NYU building. And then lo and behold, I found a passage in a letter that was written by our founder in 1831. That said to Jeremy Bentham, his friend right here, when Bentham was founding UCL, we must create universities that are in and of the city. And I said, you know, the way all people in Brooklyn do, voila, eureka. And lo and behold, it was a theory of being in the city in a certain way. That was 1.0. The world was right there. And if you came to New York, you could learn the skills first inside the university of dealing with complexity and cacophony. We were complex and cacophonous. 50,000 students, 7,000 faculty, complex and cacophonous. It was experienced as a default until that moment when we realized it could be a teachable moment. Then, once you started sending people to Chinatown, why not go to China? Why insist that people come to us? And so we began to open up what we call study away sites, where students can go for a semester or a year. They're not degree granting sites, but they go for a semester or a year. But that then led to a whole host of questions about how easy would we make it? And we began to develop pathways. So departments and units of the university began to adopt various sites. And the question was, dealing largely at the time still, as we were moving into 2005 and so forth, largely with an American student body. And Americans are unbelievably nativistic. This probably doesn't come as a surprise to you. And introverted. I mean, we're a nation that only 15% of the people have passports. Only 30% of our Congress has passports. Think of that. You want to know why our foreign policy is as bad as it is? There it is, right there. Okay, 30. But we began to say, let's make it easy for the students and their parents to understand this. So use Paris as an example. If you go to our study away site in Paris, you can take the NYU program, fully articulated in all the departments. Okay, maybe even your major would have elements fully in French. Or you can take the NYU Anglophone program. Or you can go to take a course at the Sorbonne. Or you can go to Sciences Po. Or you can combine all five, or four rather, into a fifth. Do a mix and match. You want to live in a dorm? We've got a dorm. You want to live with a family? We have a relationship? We have a family relationship with the regular, always an NYU student with this family. We know who they are, they know us, and so forth. Or you can go out and rent an apartment. How far do you want to get out of your comfort zone? Okay, the only thing we insist on is that you learn the language before you go, at least at a conversational level. So that was 2.0, study away sites. 3.0 consisted of opening new doorways. Right? So the system I've just described to you only had a doorway in New York. So if you want to apply for NYU anywhere in the world, you had to apply in New York. That's where you do most of your studies. Maybe you do 3 study away semesters. It was so easy to do, but you had to do most of your studies in New York. We were offered a spectacular partnership with the government in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates. The leader there said to me, I want to make Abu Dhabi the idea capital of the Gulf. With all that entails, that means I have to have one of the world's great universities here. Would you create a full version of NYU here? Research faculty and everything. And I will give you the resources to do it. And more importantly, given the fact we don't have a monetary endowment, we don't seek to make money on our ventures in the Global Network University. But what we seek to do is enhance. And he said, I'll give you financial aid if you can find the students in tribal villages, in rural West Virginia, in Western China. And we want to create a university here. And now I can tell you, having had our 6th entering class, that the students are turning down Oxford and Harvard and Baydar to come to NYU. And they're doing it because of the circulatory system, yes, but also because there's a unique student body there. There's unlike any other student body in the world. So we have about 1,000 undergraduates there now. We'll build to 2,000 undergraduates and 1,000 graduate students. The 1,000 undergraduates represent 114 countries and actually represent those. They're not expatriate children. They came from wherever they came from. The median student speaks 4 languages. The largest contingent from any nation is 15%, which is from the United States. But they're multilingual Americans. And we graduated our first class of 140 last May. 3 of them are at Rhodes College, Oxford. They're in every major graduate program in the world that they sought to enter, and they're from 48 different countries. So when they saw each other, they came. When they saw each other, they came. That was 3.0, a second doorway. So a kid in the Bronx now had to decide, do I apply to NYU through New York or Abu Dhabi? Which place is better to eat? Do I want massive cacophony, or do I want distilled, unavoidable cosmopolitanism, with easy community? Over here, community is hard to find, but if you find it, you've learned magical skills. Here, you can't avoid community. You'll never have to stay in a hotel room anywhere in the world in your life just because of your roommates and classmates, but you better like other people. When Abu Dhabi was a success, 4.0 came. That's the final stage. And that was when China came to us and said, we would like to do the same thing with you, again, as a partner with the government, building us a campus, providing the financial aid and so forth, not seeking to make any money, but seeking to provide high-quality education. The difference in China is 50% of the students are Chinese, but China graduates 12 million high school graduates a year. You can't apply to NYU Shanghai unless you're in the top 60,000 of that group. And then we begin to look at your application, which includes our admissions process for both Abu Dhabi and for Shanghai involves a 2-day interview process, taking classes, writing exercises, and the like. And of course, with half the class Chinese in Shanghai, it's very different. You better like Chinese people if you go to NYU Shanghai. But every Chinese student begins on the first day with a non-Chinese roommate. And the international class comes from around the world. And then they all go study away in Prague or Buenos Aires or Accra or Tel Aviv, and the whole system is circulated and mixed and matched. So that very quickly is the NYU system. This is obviously not either for the faint of heart or for the vast majority of people. But it does show, I think, both sides of internationalization, because now, on the merits, not seeking recruiting students for New York or anything else, on the merits, the entering freshman class, undergraduate class last September at NYU New York was 25% carrying foreign passports, and we expect that to be 40%, which is the immigrant population to New York City within the next 5 years. So our student body has reflected. We are now the #1 application, according to the College Board, in the top 20% of test takers on the SAT from students outside the United States. Putting this finally in 2 minutes in a more general context, there are all kinds of variations of this that can be done. Think of airline code shares, right? Airline code shares. You get on a plane, it could be a Delta plane or a BA plane or a Czech airplane. It all depends upon where the code share is operating from. The issue as you face code shares is exactly the same issue the airlines face. How do you maintain the quality? If you're Emirates Airline and you make a code share with JetBlue, as they have for domestic flights in the United States, is what customers have come to expect from Emirates Airline going to be true of JetBlue? Are your courses going to be fully articulated? The pathways point is a critical point if students are going to do serious study away, by which I mean something more than academic tourism or the consumption of all their elective courses while they go away. Because the circulatory system, you see, guarantees quality. Because if you're teaching Economics 101 in Abu Dhabi, and I'm going to teach those students Economics 201 in New York, I care who you are. I care what your course is. So every department has an interest in its subjects throughout the entire network. And when you move to a code share, that becomes more problematic. When you move to the traditional type of exchange arrangements, it's even still more problematic. One thing I will tell you that stands out like a neon sign from our experience is this whole notion of serious internationalization is not for the faint of heart and requires major institutional adjustments. It requires student wellness programs that you never thought you'd have. You really have to be there for the populations, and not least of all, for the faculty populations, because faculty can be demanding. But whether it's in cooperative agreements or treaties or whatever, this notion of the miniaturized, interconnected world, I think, is going to demand of all of us If we're going to give a good education at all, we're going to have to build the skills of developing communities of communities and working across cultural boundaries. Otherwise, we're going to be failing. And that's even for a student that never goes away from our campus. But then B, if we're really going to give our students the kind of ecumenical education they're going to need if we're going to avoid that clash of civilizations, we're going to have to move somewhere down a spectrum, not to where NYU is. That's a special case that maybe a few dozen will do. But we're all going to have to move down a spectrum where we are more able to accept both sides of internationalization, our own students going out and other students coming in as our own. Thank you very much.